Today, I'm very lucky to be interviewing Steve Monroe, author of Pyrate Principles. Hi, Steve. Thank you for allowing me to interview you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Been around for a while. I have an extensive background in business as well as nonprofit organizations. And part of the drive with the Pyrate Principles is to take the world of nonprofits, volunteer-based organizations, and companies that need to make a buck to stay in business all come together in a vital and exciting new way.
Okay, and what are your ambitions for your writing career?
Well, quite frankly, we hope that this book, which is the 7th one, it's been my privilege to write, will be not only the most successful, but we're hoping that it's going to become a nationwide bestseller.
Absolutely. What were your inspirations for writing this book?
I moved to North Carolina a little over 25 years ago, and trying to get to know what's around here, and it was different because I'd lived extensively in the Midwest and upper Midwest. But things were a little different in North Carolina than they were in the other states where I lived in. And so as I looked around, one of the things that intrigued me were pirates. And there's a great history of pirates in North Carolina, and so I just started going to places where pirates had been and started reading about pirates and collecting as much material as I could about these men and women and the difference that they made in their community, well, now over 200 years ago.
That is awesome. So what have you written thus far, including books, novels, short stories, poems, awards, stuff of that nature?
Well, the very first poem that my wife chagrins whenever I began to quote it was, Margaret, oh Margaret, so fair. But I was 15 at that time, was in love. But I wrote a short history of poems, obviously from teenage and early college years. My first serious book was called Selling to Builders, and it became a nationwide bestseller within the home building community. That was followed by another book that was called Marketing for Green Builders, another one called Translating Lives into Profitable Experiences for the Aging in Place market that is out there. We have a new book that will be out later this year called A Good Word, and it's a collection of sayings and affirmations for people who are caregivers in family situations. And now, of course, we have the Pyrate Principles.
That is great. Thank you very much for answering those so detailed. What made you decide to sit down and actually start writing the book instead of it being just an imagination of yours?
Great question. The more I delved into it and the more other writers that I read, both online as well as books and in museums and collections and things like that, there seemed to be some gaps out there. And there were opinions that, if you really examine them, that I felt were a little faulty when it came, in particular, to Blackbeard and some of his colleagues. So it became a passion to try to tell the true story of Blackbeard and the tremendous examples that he had for us that we could use today, because they were, in the midst of his ruthless life, they were very, very positive.
Yes.
And so it became a passion.
Yeah, he is known to be the bad guy, so it's
Very
good
much
to hear him being the good guy.
Very much so.
What was the hardest thing for you to write about this book? What was the hardest part?
The most difficult was just dealing with the volume of information. For instance, there are half a dozen theories as to who he was and where he was from, and to read volumes of material and then try to choose one or two that seemed, for me, in my opinion, to be the most accurate. That was very, very, very challenging. But again, there's a tremendous amount of material that's out there. Again, some of it online, some of it in journals, some of it in museums, and a tremendous amount as far as books are concerned. And trying to put all that stuff together, distill it to where it makes sense to somebody who's not familiar with that in the background, and say, here is a quintessential book that has the essence of it, and let it go from there.
Okay, that is great. So what was the easiest thing for you to write about this book?
Well, the easiest, I think, came with some of the applications, because I had an opportunity to meet some inspiring people and tell their stories. Some of these folks that perhaps without this book, no one outside of their community would ever know. And so that was, their stories just came across as they were interviewed, as we did the research and asked the big questions. Just great, great stuff.
Okay, thank you very much. Did a lot of research go into this book?
Tremendous amount of research. There are over 7 pages of opposites and ibids, an extensive bibliography that went into this, because this was not speculation. This was built on some serious what we think is serious scholarship. So tons of hours were put in by those that did research as well as myself to pull all this information together.
Did, during the writing process and research of the book, at any point in time, did the book take a different direction at any point?
Interesting you would ask that question. I thought I knew where we were going. It was the Pyrate Principles, and that's where it was. And then one day, 2 of the researchers were over working on separate projects. I was outside writing with my fountain pen and 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. And this researcher came out in tears. And I'd never seen this person ever in tears, and so I went up to her and embraced her and said, I'm not sure what's going on, but it's going to be all right. And through the sobs, she said, I have just finished interviewing Angela Reilly and her story. And then I asked her what that story was. And when she began to tell me about this young woman and what had happened in her family when she was 16 years of age in Texas, and what she did with that because of choices made to her that impacted her life, then I became emotional. And I'm fighting right now becoming emotional because of what this woman did. She took the reality of what it was in her life and didn't accept being down as a place where she was going to stay. And so with the help of others and her faith beginning to find herself lift up, and now she's making a difference in a huge area of Texas because of courage. And so I turned to my colleague, the researcher, and I said, this book is going to be bigger than you. This book is going to be bigger than me because of the truths of here. There are going to be people who are going to read this book, and their lives are going to be transformed by the stories of these men and women of courage, men and women of integrity, men and women of courage. And as they pull all those things together, it's going to make a difference in their lives. And I think transform them. And so it became not just the Pyrate Principles, but it became legendary keys that will transform your life, your business, or your organization.
Thank you very much. Who edited your book, and how did you select him? Well, or her?
I was on my way to Chicago. I had stopped in Philadelphia at the old part of the Philadelphia airport for then, let's see, I believe it was American Airlines. And I was over in the far corner getting my smartphone recharged so I would have enough charge in it to get Uber once I got to Chicago. And there was this incredible young woman that came down and sat not far from me in her kneeling position, kind of Indian-like, Native American-like. And she was looking for juice as well, and so I offered her to share one of the ports that I did. And so we just started talking. And Sari and I were just chatting, and she said, well, where are you going? I told her where I was going, and I said, what do you do for a living? And she says, well, I write children's books, and I'm an editor. I said, oh, really? She said, yes. And I said, well, I happen to be a writer looking for an editor. And the reason I was doing that is that the editor who was in the process of pulling things together had one of their family members come down with a serious disease, and that took all of her time because it became more important for her to spend time with her family than taking care of this book. Mm-hmm. And so the more that we talked, it just seemed to kind of click. And so we ended up on the same airline, one seat apart. And so I turned to this young woman who was now flying with her mother, and I said, pardon me, Sari, being the shy southern boy that I am to her, I said, would you like to have dinner Monday night or Tuesday night in Chicago? And she said, Tuesday night. And so we did. We met out by the airport in a food court. She brought her laptop, I brought my laptop, we shared, and things have clicked from that. She's made Sari Steinberg and her daughter Haya have made an incredible difference as they've helped me shape all the material that was there, get me off the dime, and get this thing done.
That is great. That's very, very interesting way to meet somebody. Not
Yes.
your typical look them up in the phone book.
Not at all.
So, who designed your book cover?
Book cover was designed by Brian Sykes. Brian is in Carthage, North Carolina, and is an editor of a monthly publication that is based in Pinehurst. Very creative. I've got two men who are part of this project, and he's one of the two most creative men I've ever been around. What a great resource.